starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, this debate is ultimately about strategy. It's about what is best or in the interest of these environmental groups, and we think we have to take the lower hanging fruit with maximum impact and outcome, which is going for the bigger fish and lobbying for the state, as opposed to spreading our efforts and capital too thinly and trying to chase after these different individual organizations. A lot of what opening themes said so far is a deadlock at best between the pros of the state or the pros of corporations. They never really nuanced it to the interest of environmentalist groups, even if there were some attempts from opening teams and opening government asserted it at best. But we tell you, it really depends on the group, but we think it can be classified in one of a few ways. Firstly, it can be in terms of awareness efforts and talking about the environmental problems and how these things affect all of us. Secondly, it's in terms of promotion of a solution on a per industry basis to be able to alleviate the problems that we are all affecting. These look like, for example, pushing for proportionate carbon tariffs, or secondly, banning open pit mining, or third, mandating, for instance, sustainability in their supply chains. Ladies and gentlemen, the common denominator of all of these things is that government intervention and legislation can only happen, and that can best happen on government side. DLO tells us a few things. He asserts in a shopping list, legislation takes too long, there are corrupt regulators, there are loopholes, they're underplayed. We tell you, yes, we acknowledge all of these efforts and difficulties, and we think that it actually takes time, but we rather try. That is opposed to assuming that these things will remain stagnant in status quo and nothing's gonna be able to happen. We think that because the point in which we get a small win, such as a regional-wide ban on plastic shopping bags or banning smoking in public spaces, we think that not following those things when they do become a law becomes illegal, ladies and gentlemen. This is as opposed to relying on the altruism of individual corporations to be altruistic in the name of CSR or ESG, which I posit is a big buzzword, is very vague, is ultimately the biggest environmental scam of the 21st century. It's tokenistic at best and leads to what? This leads to things like shitty paper straws that McDonald's or Starbucks gives us. The fact, ladies and gentlemen, that we don't have all of these shitty paper straws in all restaurants, in all fast food chains, just goes to show how fragmented this ideology or this effort or this impact really is. But before I move on to other issues, go ahead.
Remember this is the active motion. We believe that the environmentalists need to meet the need of their supporter. That's why we do it faster, we do it more visible. That's why we can lure more supporters.
No, it's more difficult on your side because you have hundreds or thousands of different corporations you're going to want to target. And even if you say, we're going to target the big guns, the bigger fish, what incentive do they have to listen to you if they're not listening to the state already in status quo, right? We think that the point in which we push and we push and we push and it does become illegal, for instance, that's when actually we're able to allow things to actually come into fruition and ultimately these things are able to happen. Now, what is the main issue in this debate, right? The issue is, why is it in the interest of environmental groups to lobby the state, and why does this approach give us better laws? This is vis-a-vis the risks of the counterfactual, why corporations and individual organizations are A, not as effective, or B, a riskier kind of strategy and approach. We think that we have an easier path to victory if we push the state versus a plurality of different corporations with conflicting interests. And we get this exclusively from Ariel when she talked about three things. She talked about the interest of the state and how ultimately, to add to that, the state does get proceeds from taxes, not just from individual taxpayers, but also corporate taxes, ladies and gentlemen, which comprise majority of the fund for these environmental efforts. Things that all these corporations are mandated to pay already, and we think that the taxpayers behind these things can directly lobby against the state, impeach their leaders, go out and lobby, and clamor against the state if they fail to be able to do what they have to do regarding the environment. That is opposed to not knowing, whose fault is it? Is it McDonald's? Is it Starbucks? Is it Chevron? What am I gonna do? Short or sell their stock? They have limited things that they can do. Secondly, she also talked about limited resources, meaning we think that these environmental groups have to concentrate their effort and not put all of their eggs in one particular basket. Meaning, they have to make a bet, who corporation are we gonna go to, who corporation are we gonna hold accountable? And we tell you, it depends. They might get it, they might succeed and say, all right, it's this corporation. But in instances where they're wrong, they're tapped out of budget. They don't have enough funds already. We think that ultimately, this leads to the third thing, a conflict of interest. For example, a startup and a business might be focused on growth or profitability, while a big corporation might be focused on protecting margins. They see all of these additional efforts as cost, and this is a direct response to closing opposition who tells you that they have an incentive to do so. They don't. Even if they did, they're less likely to push through with all of those particular things. Why? Because corporations are different. Not everyone is a L'Oreal or a Nestle who ultimately is more strict with their use of single-use plastics. But corporations like ExxonMobil, Saudi Aramco continue to not give a shit. And we think that in a world where you try to push them to actually care, you're wasting your saliva, you're wasting your resources, you're wasting your effort. It's not worth the risk. It ultimately is easier and better off if you lobby for the state, even if it doesn't work, even if these things are less likely to happen. The point in which we do succeed, which actually happens sooner rather than later, it becomes better off. Why do we win this debate? We win this debate because we filled the missing middle analysis for opening. We gave you both a vertical and horizontal extension of ultimately why these things are going to be better. And we responded and flipped the cases coming from opening opposition and closing opposition, which ultimately tell you about how, these things also happen within corporations. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Would we rather have concentrated efforts on one individual or spread it out throughout the state? For all these reasons, proud to propose vote CG. Thank you. Fuck!